Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Hope you had a happy and healthy Thanksgiving. You may remember a couple of weeks ago I made a video about Formula One drivers, four in fact, that may be coming to IndyCar next year. Well, in the past 24 hours, we've had updates on three of those drivers and their potential involvement in the NTT IndyCar Series next year. Those are Sergio Perez, Kevin Magnussen, and Romain Grosjean. Now, only one of those drivers, according to these latest reports, really has a good shot of becoming a full-time IndyCar driver. Does that mean that the other two are completely out of luck in terms of having any chance to see them stateside next year? No, and I'll explain that a little bit later on in this video. But to start out, we need to start in a completely different place than Formula One or IndyCar, but you'll see in a bit how it all relates together. We need to talk about the IMSA sports car silly season, particularly the Rolex 24 entry list. And then we'll tie it together by talking about the three Formula One drivers that may be headed to IndyCar next year. So starting out with the Wayne Taylor Racing Acura, they announced recently the rest of their driver lineup, which includes Helio Castroneves, Ricky Taylor, and Alexander Rossi. All of those drivers are cast-offs from the recently disbanded Penske Acura program. So it makes a lot of sense for Wayne Taylor Racing to go out and get very experienced drivers with that car. It's also interesting that Helio Castroneves signed with Wayne Taylor Racing rather than the sister Acura team, Meyer Shank Racing, because of course he races for Shank next year in IndyCar. Now, speaking of prototypes, while it's not Daytona Prototype International, the Rick Ware Racing Team, we've talked about them a lot. They will once again enter the Rolex 24. They entered it last year, but were unable to actually make the grid. They have decided to enter a Ligier LMP2 in association with Eurasia Racing. Now, they've already named a driver, and it's no surprise because he shares the name of the team. It's Cody Ware. So now we also know what Cody Ware was hinting at when he tweeted out that little pen emoji, which is kind of the universal symbol in American racing, at least, for having signed something. And it also adds the first LMP2 Ligier to the IMSA series in quite a long time. So it's looking like a very strong and diverse LMP2 field for the 24 hours of Daytona, which is something I certainly couldn't have predicted going into the 2021 season. But this is when we get to talk about one of the Formula One drivers, and it's something that ties into IMSA and the Rolex 24. Motorsport.com is reporting that, or at least they were the first report, there have been several other outlets that have now picked this up, that Kevin Magnussen, that other Haas F1 driver, will be driving the DPI for Ganassi Racing. That, of course, is a Cadillac, and he will be driving it with Renger van de Zande and Scott Dixon. And Magnussen would be one of the full season drivers for Ganassi in the IMSA series. Now, it needs to be noted that one of the other outlets that picked this particular story up was Racer.com, and they had quotes from Gunther Steiner, who of course is the team boss at Haas F1, specifically talking about trying to help Kevin Magnussen get an IndyCar ride, using some of his connections in the States to be able to do that. So let's talk a little bit about Kevin Magnussen and any potential outlets he would have at this particular point to go to IndyCar racing. So there were a lot of people who jumped on this story right off the bat and said, oh, of course, he's driving for Ganassi and IMSA, that means he'll drive an IndyCar for Ganassi in IndyCar. I don't think that's possible. And I think several other people have said this, but I'll say it just so that we get it all the bases covered. Ultimately, Ganassi has 5 drivers spread across 4 cars in IndyCar, when you include Jimmy Johnson and Tony Kanaan splitting that ride. I would be very surprised if Chip was willing to go to a 5th IndyCar, even part-time, for anyone other than Jimmy Johnson. If Jimmy Johnson wants to do the Indy 500, that's probably the only way I could see a 5th Ganassi car materializing. I think it would be very unlikely that Kevin Magnussen would be suddenly the guy to jump over on the IndyCar side of things, at least for Ganassi. Now, certainly Zach Brown has mentioned Kevin Magnussen's name a couple of times, and I would think that maybe Kevin Magnussen might do a partial season or at the very least, he might be one of the drivers Zach Brown is considering to run the Indy 500 for McLaren. Originally, or at least Zach Brown said, like I said in the previous video, actually would have considered Magnussen for the seat that ultimately was filled by Felix Rosenqvist. Kevin Magnussen apparently would have been his first choice. So that's kind of interesting. So certainly Magnussen is on Zach Brown's radar. But I would also say that the fact that that Magnussen has signed in IMSA suggests to me that this was the best option. And certainly a Ganassi sports car ride, that's a very good option in terms of a career move. That's going to be a very, very competitive race car. And certainly he has the connections in IMSA. His dad, Jan Magnussen, obviously he raced in Formula One, IndyCar, but really his career shone most greatly and most brightly in sports cars, first with the Panos team and then moving over to Corvette Racing, where he had years and years of success, really, really building quite a legacy in GT racing. This could be something very similar because, again, kind of like his father, Kevin really never got a great opportunity in Formula One. He definitely showed some great potential. Maybe sports cars is where he ends up for the rest of his career. I think he would be a great IndyCar driver. I've said that several times. I think he fits the mold of a driver who would be a race winner in IndyCar if he gets an opportunity. But at least for this year, I'm beginning to lean towards, if he does get an opportunity, it'll be for the Indy 500 only, and we'll just have to see what happens in 2022. Could be wrong, though. I'm sure there'll be a report soon that says that completely debunks that. But as of right now, that's where I'm feeling on Kevin Magnussen. Sergio Perez. Now, this is something, another report from Racer that's a lot more cut and dry than the other two drivers. Pretty much, Sergio Perez has said he is willing to sit out 2021 if there isn't a competitive Formula One seat for him to take, or possibly even a Formula One seat for him to take at all. This is interesting, certainly, and let's talk about why. So, I think it's no surprise that Sergio Perez has a very high stock in Formula One right now. The most recent podium he scored was brilliant, no doubt about it. The fact that he doesn't have a team is definitely a shame. The problem I'm having with this decision from Perez is I'm trying to see the path that he might have to get a good seat next year. Now, certainly, if some bombshell happens and Lewis were to retire at the end of 21, going into the 22 season, or if Albon is kept on at Red Bull for another year and he underperforms again, that could be a place where Sergio Perez could slip into and have a very competitive seat. How likely do I think those things are to happening? And that's why I go back to, and I've repeated this a couple of times, so I apologize if you're a subscriber, but to me, the pitch, whoever in IndyCar would be making this to Sergio Perez, I've been saying this kind of from the perspective of a Zach Brown, if you're talking to Sergio Perez, what I would be saying is, look, you can be competitive in IndyCar. You don't have to sit on the sidelines or wait for a bad team to try to sign you in Formula One. Again, I'm sure Sergio Perez knows a lot more about his prospects in Formula One than I do. And certainly, for what Perez's career is versus what maybe I think he could have, if he wants to pursue Formula One and he thinks there is a good seat that he might be able to get in the near future, I understand that decision for sure. Because if he goes to IndyCar, almost certainly in the last couple of years, if you make that move to IndyCar, generally speaking, you're not going to come back to Formula One. The only exception to that at this point is Fernando Alonso, and Alonso, again, only ran the Indy 500, and had he committed to IndyCar racing, would he have gotten that Renault offer? I don't know. I would probably lean towards probably not. If Sergio Perez is looking at that as the example, that would seem like he's willing to commit to Formula One at least for the next 2 years, just in case a winning car comes up. More power to him. I'd like to see him in a winning car in Formula One. And finally, this was quite a bombshell from Racer.com. Just came out today. Marshall Pruitt on the report. Link will be in the description for this one. Romain Grosjean is linked to a ride at AJ Foyt Racing. He would be joining, according to the Racer report, Sebastian Bourdais and Dalton Kellett at the team were he to sign. Now, there's nothing to indicate that he has signed with the team yet, but you would imagine if Racer has gone with this story that they are pretty close. There are a lot of questions here because this has some major implications for the IndyCar silly season. So I definitely thought that Romain Grosjean was like the perfect Dale Coyne driver. Certainly from the perspective as well that he's already worked with Santino Ferrucci, who would almost certainly, even though he hasn't been re-signed yet, be the lead driver at that team. AJ Foyt Racing is an interesting one for a couple of reasons. Number one, the connection with Sebastian Bourdais. Now, Bourdais has already improved the performance of that team significantly, particularly on the road courses. Grosjean would be able to plug into that team, and assuming that he would be able to drive a Sebastian Bourdais setup, I think that is a potentially really potent two-car, 1-2 punch for AJ Foyt and IndyCar racing, at least on the road courses. I had some other people mention this to me, which is interesting because I brought this comparison up in the last video talking about Romain Grosjean. The last driver to win for AJ Foyt Racing was Takuma Sato. And I said that I feel like the closest comparison Romain Grosjean has is Takuma Sato. And if you look at what has happened with Takuma Sato's career since being in IndyCar, two-time Indy 500 winner, multiple-time race winner, you would think that Grosjean, if he is able to get comfortable and the AJ Foyt team is a solid competitor, he may be able to have a similar level of success, a kind of career renaissance, if you will. So from that perspective, this is definitely an interesting one for a lot of reasons. I want to see this happen. There's no doubt about it. It would be kind of funny for AJ Foyt to have two Frenchmen on the team. And the fact that Racer is reporting that Kellett will sign, the prospect of 3 full-time Foyt cars, that's a thumbs up in my book. Now you may be saying, when we're talking about IndyCar and the AJ Foyt team, what about Charlie Kimball? Yeah, what about Charlie Kimball? It's very conspicuous that Racer did not mention Kimball's name once. So where could Charlie Kimball go? As far as I know, he still has the funding from the Novo Nordisk company. I think that's what it's still called. I think it may be called something else, Tresiba or whatever. He's had the same sponsor for years. It's a diabetic company because he is diabetic, a diabetic race car driver himself. As far as I know, that sponsorship has not gone away. It certainly could have. If that sponsorship is still there, you would assume that Charlie Kimball will be on the grid somewhere next year. Okay, well, where would that be? Well, Dale Coyne Racing is one you could think of as a potential landing spot. But why not Carlin Racing? That was a place that Charlie Kimball has run before. He did not look particularly bad when he was with that team. And one of the greatest successes Kimball had, really, was being the only driver out of that team to get a car in the 2019 Indianapolis 500. So certainly I think Charlie Kimball's a driver that Trevor Carlin would trust if he's going for a second car, or maybe he becomes the oval driver for the 59, something like that. I would think that if Charlie Kimball does not have a path at Foyt and he still has funding, Carlin Racing might be the place for him to return to. But what do you guys think? This is definitely interesting. Once again, it's like everything has changed, but nothing has changed from the last video. Grosjean is still absolutely the clear-cut favorite to get an IndyCar ride. It looks like Magnussen is going to race in the States. How much of that time will be spent in IndyCar? Doesn't look like much this year. And it looks like Sergio Perez is waiting for his ship to come in Formula One. Do you think it will come in? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. By the way, got a new webcam. Let me know what you think of the quality of the footage. I hope it will look good. I hope it will sound good. And this will continue to make quality of life and live streams and things like that much, much easier. We'll see you in the next video.